Hey everyone, enrollment is officially open for Velocity 2020. If you want to create a strategic plan for the beginning of the year, the beginning of the decade, then head on over to velocitywork.pro/2020. That's velocitywork.pro/2020. If you join this week by October 25th, there's a couple of sweet bonuses, so check it out. Hope to see you there.
I'm Melissa Shanahan, and this is the Velocity Work Podcast, episode number 12. This podcast is for attorneys who are running their own firms. We explore tactics, tools, and stories related to pushing past simply lawyering well and into building a successful firm. Working in your firm and working on your business are two very different things. This podcast focuses on the latter. Hi, guys. Hi. I want to touch base on how it's going after last week's episode. Did you listen to it? Superthinking Part 1, which was all about cleaning out your mind, and it was to prepare you so that you are ready for this week, Superthinking Part 2. If you haven't listened to it yet, I highly recommend that you go back and you listen to it. This episode will be so much easier to really understand if you've got that concept down and if you've heard what I taught in the last episode. So let's jump into this week's Superthinking Part 2. And by the way, feel free to let me know. Speakpipe.com/velocitywork is a great place. You can it's basically, you just leave a voice message there. You can do it anonymously or you can put your name and email in there. But let me know how it's going. Like, what have you noticed? Have you done the practice? What have you noticed? Because we all notice something. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time and I still notice things. So I would love to know about your experience now that you're sort of getting primed and ready to roll for this work that I'm presenting to you this week. So jumping into Superthinking Part 2, which is actually the Superthinking part of it. So I'm pumped to bring it to you. We talked a little bit about this last week. I'm going to do a quick review, but most people do not require their brains to do the work it's capable of doing. What people do tend to do is to stuff their brains full of information and inputs, which we're going to touch on a little bit more today. And it's not the first time on this podcast we touched on it because it's such a problem. It's like this abundance of awesome resources that we have at our fingertips, especially the faster technology moves and the more that gets developed. But also we have got to monitor and slow that on purpose. We need to reduce our inputs, be really selective. And this episode will go into deeply. You'll see why that's so important. Now, I bet a lot of us think that our brains are for studying material and regurgitating it because that's what we were taught the whole time our brains were developing, right? Your job in school is to get the right answer and put it on a piece of paper. Your job is not to think up answers. You have to find the right answer. You have to recall the right answer. And so we've programmed our brains that its job is to study other things and, other people's answers, other people's interpretations, other people's opinions, other people's theories, and write them down or recall them and recite the answers. And the only time we were really ever asked to write from our own brains is if we were maybe doing a creative paper or something. And I don't mean to imply that we don't take input from the outside. I mentioned on the last podcast, I do think that's important. I do it. I do it all the time. I have a coach. I listen to podcasts. I read books, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that we need to just shut down all inputs, but for as much time as we allow input, we also have to allow for output. Now is a good time to sort of go a little deeper on inputs. You want to make sure that your inputs are high quality, that they are useful. if they aren't going to help ignite or trigger your own wisdom, then you might consider not choosing that input. Be selective. When your brain is on the regular, filled with other people's ideas and inputs from other people's lives, other people's opinions, other people's experience, constantly reading, constantly on Facebook, constantly watching TV, constantly getting inputs from everything else, there is no space for your brain to actually think. The only thing it can do is just regurgitate or just implement exactly what it picked up. And like we talked about in the last podcast, that will get you so far for sure. But it is not the most ideal way. It's not the best way to use this amazing tool that you have between your ears called your brain. And really stop and think about what your brain is capable of. And we don't really use it nearly to its full capacity. Most people, they learn and then they just do. And then they learn and then they do. So when you fill your brain with information, even if you just do what you learned, which does get you somewhere, but it's not ideal. It's not going to take you to a next level for sure. When you do that and you fill your brain is utilizing all of its energy to interpret other people's work instead of creating its own work. I highly encourage you to break this habit of looking outside for solutions and for answers and start looking inside. Develop the skill of accessing your own unique, creative ideas. We have to allow for our own ideas, our own unique experience and background to mesh with the inputs that we've gathered. And I like to have this very balanced in my life. So if I'm going to spend time reading a book, I want that same amount of time to come up with my own ideas stemming from what I just read. And there's some really specific ways that I do that I'm going to share with you later. An idea that my coach gave me is that after you read a book or you listen to a podcast or insert any other input here, then ask a question. Like, what's something that you would want to ask about that book, about something that you've just read? And instead of looking up the author and sending them an email and asking them the question, or asking a teacher or someone else, ask your own brain to come up with the answer. You will be amazed at the access you have inside your own brain to such wisdom, to so many great ideas. Now, a lot of your ideas won't be great, especially in the beginning when you're really applying this to yourself and you're really trying to utilize your brain fully to be able to take what it's learned and create something new out of that. It's not always pretty. But if you haven't practiced super thinking before, of course, you need to expect that. And a lot of ideas will just be regurgitations from other people's ideas. This does not mean that you're dumb. This doesn't mean that you're missing something. It doesn't mean anything has gone wrong here. What it does mean that you're educated because you've gone through the school system. You've learned how to regurgitate other people's ideas. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a really good foundation for super thinking. Having a foundation of ideas that people who've come before you have introduced to your brain is a beautiful thing. But there's a next level. There's a next step in being able to create. It allows you to create your own legacy, for you to be able to create your own ideas, your own solutions by utilizing your own brain and thinking critically and coming up with questions that will help you discover amazing answers. There's a couple of things I'm reminded of right now as we're talking about really using your brain and flexing that muscle and strengthening that muscle and developing a capacity for coming up with solutions and ideas and all that. The first thing is James Altucher, who is a brilliant writer, has this daily exercise that he does and he promotes is a daily exercise of coming up with 10 ideas a day. And he talks about, when you start this practice, it's really hard and most of the ideas are not worth anything, but that it is like a muscle and that over time you get better and better and stronger and stronger. And pretty soon you're an idea machine, which is super valuable to the world, not just your world, but the world. And you could do a different type of list every day. So for example, one day you could sit down and you could generate 10 ideas for your employees. The next day you can sit down and generate 10 ideas to make your clients' experience smoother. The next day, maybe it's 10 ideas for how to show appreciation to your spouse. The next day, 10 ideas for how to attract ideal associates. The next day, 10 ideas to create more space in your schedule, et cetera, et cetera. But it really is, I love this practice. And I've used this before. I think I need to go back to this. Like now that I'm thinking about it and I'm talking to you guys about it, I would like to go back to flexing that idea muscle specifically. It's kind of fun to sit down and it's hard. It's so hard to get to 10 ideas. And you realize that like 8 of them, if you do get to 10, 8 of them are just ridiculously terrible. But there's 2 that are like, that's freaking genius. You know, it's a pretty cool exercise. And you can bring attention to the areas of your life where you're really feeling like there needs to be some creativity or some solutions for. So James Altucher, he has a podcast too. He does some pretty cool interviews. The second thing I'm reminded of is the podcast I recorded for you guys on the 4 types of luck. We talk about in that episode how important your unique set of knowledge and your experience and your background sets you up for a specific kind of luck. Because when you learn something new from an input, let's say, your unique background comes into play with that new information, and it sort of creates this light bulb moment that no one else would have or could have because they don't have your exact experience. They don't see that input the same way. They aren't interpreting. It's not rolling around in their mind the same way. And that's true for every single person. I could put 10 of you owner attorneys in front of me, and just with your different backgrounds, I could say, I want you to read this piece of information, and then I want you to write down solutions and ideas that stem from that, from you reading that. And your solutions and ideas would be so very different because of your unique experiences and backgrounds and skill sets that you bring to that moment. So it's fascinating that it kind of ties in with the 4 types of luck. You quote unquote, it's like you get quote unquote luckier and luckier the more that you use your brain to come up with unique solutions and ideas. Okay, so here's the steps to superthinking. And do you not love that word, superthinking? I actually looked up superthinking to see where it came from. There is a book called Superthinking that is not this concept. It's not addressing this concept. It's like mental models, but not to do with what I'm talking about. I first learned this from my coach. I have heard other people talk about it. I don't know exactly where it stemmed from, but I love that word, superthinking. It is kind of fun to have an event on your calendar that you're going to show up for that says superthinking. Like that's pretty great. Anyway, superthinking. Here's the first step. Create some thinking time for yourself. And this is when you're only thinking. You're not on a computer. You're not reading. You're not listening to podcasts. You are thinking on purpose. I carve this out every week during my power hour. I sit like in my power hour, I figure out when that week am I going to have some space carved out for just my brain to come up with solutions and ideas and think about the inputs that I've received, think about the information that I've received, and how can I sort of play with that and mold it and not just regurgitate it into my business. That's the first step, is carve out time. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Power Hour, it's episode number 4. We talk about Power Hour. It's a productivity episode. The second is to come up with a high quality question that you want answers to. And so I try to come to these super thinking sessions with something really specific that I want to tackle, something that I want to play with. Here's some sample questions just to get your gears turning, just to get your head wrapped around what kind of questions you might bring to the table, bring to the super thinking session. How am I going to bring in more money? How am I going to focus on marketing and building systems, processes, automation inside of my firm at the same time? How can we make X process more efficient? How can I make sure clients never have to reach out to me for an update? How am I going to figure out this morale problem we're having inside the firm? How am I going to get my associates to bring in more business? How am I going to make sure I have a tight, kick-ass strategy for 2020? How am I going to improve productivity inside of my firm? These are just sample questions that I know that some of those hit home for some of you. They're top of mind where it's like, oh yeah, that would be really good to sit down and think about. But that's the thing. I mean, we don't really take the time to take a step back and actually come up with solutions or just allow our brain to spit out information that only it can spit out. So really kind of think about what are some pain points or what's most top of mind for you right now. And at your first super thinking session, sit down and just bring that question. And I have journals filled with the thinking that comes from these sessions. I encourage you to do the same. Journals. You can also think about this stuff when you're going for walks or when you're exercising or whatever, if that works for you too. But you've got to record what is happening. So those are some ideas, but I'm sure there's other things that are top of mind for you. Bring those questions to your super thinking sessions and just see what comes up. The third step, okay, so we've got create some time for yourself. This is only think time, nothing else. It's you and the paper. Carve that out. I do it once a week at minimum, and it feels good to do. It feels good to think through things. The second is to come up with a high quality question you want answers to. It could be a problem you're having, ideas for things you want to create, but just ask yourself a really specific question and then listen for the answer. The third is to access your own unique, creative, and original ideas by thinking on purpose. Now, some people like to let their brain do like a stream of consciousness and they just write. They just write, like whatever's coming to their mind. If that's the way you best work, go for it. You guys know how you best work. I get the best thinking from processing out loud. So I'll present a question and I'll think of what I've learned from X input and I'll talk through it almost like I'm talking to some fake audience about like this is how you would address those things. These are ideas for you on how you would address those things. And I just it's like when I go into teaching mode, my brain fires at it's a different game for me. And so if I pretend that I'm presenting or teaching, then these ideas start cranking. And so then I'll take notes on whatever comes out of my mouth, which sounds ridiculous to say out loud, but that's the way that I get the most out of my super thinking sessions. Another tip here, one important question you can ask yourself as your brain is generating ideas is, what do I need to believe? It's important to actually know the answer to this question as you implement what your brain is producing. So sometimes I'll just I'll be talking out loud and thinking through ideas and writing down, taking notes. And then at the end of it, I'll just say, okay, if I implement this, like if I take, these top 2 ideas that just came out of this and I run with this, what do I need to believe in order for this to be successful? Because a lot of times what comes out of my brain is new and it's uncharted territory for myself. And so it's easy to not have a lot of confidence around moving forward with something. It's easy to have a lot of doubt. It's easy to find reasons why it won't work, all of that. And so I really have to be anchored to a higher level thinking and a higher level like belief around what I'm embarking on. So that can be a helpful question. What do I need to believe? What's other supplemental questions that you can ask your brain once it's in sort of generation mode? It's generating a bunch of ideas. These are questions, I don't always use all of these, but I have used these at some point or another. What would happen right now if I just chose one answer to this question? And that reduces overwhelm for me, because sometimes it's like, oh my God, there's so many things in front of me on this paper. Like, I don't really know where to start. I like some of these ideas, but it's more just about picking one. So what would happen right now if I chose one answer to this question? When this problem is solved, what will be different? What would I do if I knew what to do? Sometimes what comes to my brain is I don't know, but then I'll just ask myself, well, yeah, but if you did know, what would you do? And it's like a weird little hack. I think Tony Robbins, I think I learned that from him. How would I answer this question if my life depended on it? Now, this isn't graphic enough for me. I don't know what, like that doesn't hit home for me when I say, if my life depended on it, what would come up? Like that doesn't make me think harder or light a fire under my ass. But what does, and this is so wrong on so many levels, but this is what the question I ask myself is, if someone had a gun to my head, how would I answer this question? And it immediately flips me. It's almost like you better have a freaking answer or. And I know that there's answers in my brain, and my brain always comes up with something. Even if it's not awesome, it comes up with something. So sometimes I use that. Or, which is even more, probably too much information, it actually affects me more to think of, someone having a gun to my husband's head. And I'm standing there and it's like, well, idea or. And it's like, oh my God. And then I just crank out ideas. And sometimes they're silly and sometimes it's like, that's awesome. So anyway, that helps me. I don't know why. It just kind of gets the juices flowing. And then also, what does my future self, who's already figured this out, advise me to do? I use this a lot because I do think, I'm constantly evolving and I'm building my business is growing, and I am at a point now where I wasn't last year. And I didn't have a blueprint to get here, right? And so I don't have a blueprint to get to the next level, but there is a version of myself that gets there. So if I were to think about her, what would she give me the advice of? I've met these goals. I've overcome these obstacles. What advice does she have for me? That works for me often. And then also just taking James Altucher's shtick. What are 10 ideas for me, for my company, for my clients? I use the 10 idea thing, which I'm going to start using more now that we're talking about it. So those are just ideas. Don't just use my questions though. Ask your brain to come up with useful questions that you can ask yourself during your Superthinking sessions. And you can even ask yourself, what should I be asking myself, and require an answer. That's the thing. It's like our brain isn't used to doing this. It's not comfortable. It will always take the path of least resistance. Always. It's very efficient. Our brains are super, super efficient. And so when you're trying to train it or create a different way for it to behave and to be and to perform, it's not easy. I don't know will come up in your brain a lot, or just blank space, or it'll just be hard enough that you'll just decide, I actually want a snack. I don't want to do this anymore. So you really have to be disciplined and require of your brain that it comes up with something. And the more you do that, the easier it gets, and the better content that is produced. Okay, and I can't reiterate enough that when your brain does come up with, I don't know, if you're asking yourself a question and your brain is basically just blank and you just think, I don't know. When that happens, just go ahead and use that question I gave you a minute ago. Okay, but if you did know, what would you say? Use that. And then you will be surprised. There'll be some sort of answer. You just need to refuse confusion. That's kind of what this boils down to. Your brain will act very confused. And it's like, what are you doing to me? Why can't we just learn and do, right? So when you're first doing this, it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel clunky. And you just need to refuse confusion and require that answers are generated. Another important thing to remember, the opposite of confusion and asking others for the answers is super thinking. So get in the practice of making it rare that you ask a question that you haven't already considered the answer to. So just like, we talked about earlier, you can institute this with your team where it's like, I'm here for questions. And there is a way to be productive about that, by the way. Like maybe there's certain hours where you're open, office hours or something where you're open for questions so that you can stay in a good groove. But let's just say, even if you don't have that, that's not the point. They come to you and the idea that they can bring a question, but they already have to have an answer to it before they come. And then they can test that out and see were they right, were they wrong, so they can continue to learn and flex that muscle as well for themselves. It'll cut down on the questions that you get, because a lot of times it'll just be common sense, or there is a place to look for that resource and they can figure that out without having to ask you. It's the same for you. So just make it a practice that you don't just ask a question that you haven't already thought through and see what your brain comes up with first. Because here's what's happened to me more than a few times. When I've practiced this and I do have a question I want to ask someone or something, I actually think about the answer or the solution first, and I'll come up with it on my own, and then I'll ask, and I don't like their answer as much as mine. Like it's almost like, oh, I do see how that could work, but what I just came up with is better. For my business, it's better. And you just know it. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens. And if I wouldn't have taken a moment to actually consider that, I wouldn't have had that greater answer for myself. When you start paying attention to your brain because you've given it thinking time, you've sat down, you say, okay, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to think for an hour. I'm going to listen to what my brain has to say. I'm going to listen to its ideas. I'm going to listen to its theories on things. I'm going to take notes. It starts to generate and it gets momentum because it has a clearing. It has a space for its ideas to flow into. Super thinking is really asking yourself to look beyond the surface answers and to ask deeper questions. One of the most important questions that you can incorporate, which I didn't talk to you about earlier, but just remember this, is why? And especially about other people's behavior. Really asking why and trying to understand other people's behavior. That can be helpful. But even, if there's sort of this recipe, this is the way everybody does this process, or this is the way everybody does X, Y, and Z, really asking why. And maybe it's it doesn't need to be changed. But when you ask why it's done a certain way, it all starts, like you can easily poke holes in where it could be more efficient or just better, right? I spend a lot of time asking and answering my own questions. I work hard to do that. High quality, tough questions that I would love the answers to. And more, especially around my clients. I want to know why they have the problems they have, why they struggle in the ways that they do, so that I can come up with new solutions for them. I spend a lot of time thinking about you all, and I'm actually upping the time that I'm designating to allow myself to have more of that, because it's so important to come up with solutions to help, from my perspective, to help owner attorneys become top-notch business owners, great business owners, and leaders within their own firms, and to grow their firms sustainably, right? A tip when it comes to asking yourself these high-quality questions is make sure that when you're asking yourself questions, they're positively phrased. For instance, don't ask yourself Debbie Downer questions like, why can't I keep a paralegal? Why do I suck? Why is there never enough money? Like, those aren't high quality questions. Another way to think about it is don't ask negative questions, ask positive questions. How can I? When will I? What do I need to know in order to ... What don't I know yet? What do I need to implement in order to have better team engagement, as an example? What is the added value I can create for my clients? Like, those are all positive questions, high level questions. So really try to bend that way. And then write down your ideas, write them all down. Even if they're crazy, write them down. And through the practice of superthinking, you gain an understanding of the power of your mind. You become really clear in your own decisions, in your own observations, in your own wisdom when you take time to think, when you schedule time to solve problems with your own brain, to answer questions with your own brain, to create tools and solutions with your own brain instead of relying on Google or books or someone else to solve it for you. I like to think that the answers are not out there. The answers are in here. Like that's my default. I try to keep that as my default perspective because starting internally is always more fruitful and deeper and better and more curated and customized to what I need than what an answer outside of me can provide most of the time. I've been given a brain so I can figure out new questions to ask and new answers to those questions. When you require it of yourself, you come up with new answers. You come up with new things that have not been created before. They can't be created by anybody else because as we touched on earlier, and it's touched on in the 4 Kinds of Luck episode, what you've done is you've taken the inputs of the world and of your life and of your education and you've mixed them with the unique brain that is yours. And the way that your brain fires and comes up with solutions and ideas is unique to anybody else. So if you don't do this work to come up with your own answers, your own ideas, we'll always just be recycling everybody else's ideas. And oftentimes we are recycling ideas from history that are no longer relevant to us now. But people aren't stopping to think about new ways to do things. We need to use our minds to come up with modern ideas, to come up with modern ways of serving ourselves and our communities and the people in our lives. And if we disagree with something that we see going on or disagree with an idea, instead of being mad about it or complaining about it, we can start asking ourselves about it. And the reason I put this in here is because one of the things that's opened up for me is when I don't like the way something is getting done, I ask myself, well, how then should we do it? Like, how would I do it differently? What should we create? What could we create? What's the solution? And when I try to figure out what solution I would come up with, I realize it's really hard. It's harder than I thought. And it makes me more compassionate about the ideas that are being practiced and tried and used in the world. So even though maybe I think there's a better way, if I get stuck on how to come up with it, it kind of gives you compassion for like, well, I get it. Like it's tough. To wrap up, superthinking is something that your world, your firm, your life needs and is ready for. We have the time to do it. If you set aside time and you show up for that, you have time to do it. You have the ability to do it. We owe it to ourselves to develop this absurdly incredible, marvelously complex CPU of an organ. Honor your brain. Be in reverence of it. Be a good steward of what you were given and continue to grow its capacity. I hope this landed and resonated, and I hope that there's some nuggets you can take away. Enjoy it. This is actually a really useful, fun part of my week every week, and I'm hoping that you experience the same thing. Don't forget, go to speakpipe.com/velocitywork. You can leave comments and questions there. We can answer them on a future episode. I would love to hear more from you guys about your work doing this. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Carve out time to clean out your mind daily and super think regularly too. You will be so glad you did. All right, everyone. Have a great one. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the Velocity Work Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you run your own law firm, you have to come see if the Velocity Work client experience is for you. Head over to hello.velocitywork.com to set up a free call. We can learn more about one another, answer any questions we may have for one another, and determine if the Velocity Work client experience is a right fit. I hope to connect with you soon. Show notes from this episode can be found at velocitywork.com/podcast.